I'm truly excited to be here to talk about this work. It's getting beat up lately. It's a tough topic to discuss. I know that a lot of friends in corporate that are still doing this work have been leaving this space. I know that my former boss, who's a chief diversity officer for a global company, just said he's retiring early simply because of the fact that there's no more room to innovate and be creative in this space. And so it's becoming tough, and the function is getting beat up. And I have to confess that this is a topic I have not publicly spoken about in some time. Um, it's work that I've identified both personally and professionally, deeply personal for me. I'm someone who grew up my first language was Spanish. My mother was a single mom. My family's from Nicaragua. And, growing up in a diverse environment, I always knew that this was going to be part of the work that I would do later in life. And so for me to have stepped back and not talk about this has been a big change for me. And so this is the first time I've come out to talk about, this work. And so I'm excited about it. But in the last year, not having talked about this, the time's given me an opportunity to reflect a lot about this work, right? I follow the news, I follow the politics, I engage with a lot of friends with what's happening, and it's been a time to get some clarity about the work that I did and what's happening in the world of DEI today. I've hit moments of doubt and even moments where I thought, you know what, I'm done. I don't want to talk about this anymore. It's exhausting. I've had friends who have listened to me talk to other people about it, and they're like, how do you continue? Like, you just go in circles. Like, what are you trying to prove at this point, right? So it's become tough. But here we are, and I'm glad we are, because the truth is that no matter what side of the coin you're on, this work matters because it impacts everyone. And what we don't speak often enough about is about the real business outcomes that this work drives. And unfortunately, I've been there far too many times where the conversation drifts into that echo chamber of rhetoric and buzzwords and performative gestures and without anchoring the work into like real business outcomes or things that keep an organization moving forward and thriving. So today, what I want to do is talk about those things in that light, how they can move markets and strengthen brands and turn strategy into measurable success, work that I spent years doing. So those are going to be my confessions of former chief diversity officer. And I'm going to highlight some of the inclusion business drivers that worked during my time doing this work. But let me start by saying that it's good to see some familiar faces. I looked at the list and recognized some people that were there and reached out to some folks and who are familiar with some of the work that I did at CVS Health and the work that I did at Pizza Hut. But in May of 2024, last year, I left corporate America for good, I hope. And I left along with the work that I poured my heart and soul into. But I wanted to explore new ventures. I wanted to do something different. And so I did. I wrote a book titled The Art of Transformation, and I'm hoping to get it published. I'm hoping that it gets published this fall. I'm a couple of months behind, but I'm hoping that the next couple of months it's out. But I also created a self-transformation tool and a workbook to go along with it. I've started coaching in self-transformation. I launched a podcast where I am talking to people about their real transformation because I love to listen to stories about real people who have undergone change in their lives, who have gone through transformation, who have fallen down and have risen. And so I've made that kind of my mission in life coming out of the work that I did in DEI. And then I'm completing a second book that I co-wrote about the Elijah Project. And the Elijah Project was founded in Rhode Island, and the book is actually about the founder and his story when he had $48.50. He and his wife were down and out, almost homeless. They were about to have their sixth child, and they used that $46.50 to buy food for the homeless this one particular day. And fast forward 14 years later, it's an $8 million organization. It's a supply chain logistics organization that's feeding about 150,000 families a year, and not just feeding them, but providing products for them, things that they need in their homes. And so, you know, talk about, you know, the evolution and transformation and finding purpose in your work, right? So he and I are completing that project together and hoping to get that published sometime in 2026. But again, I'm fascinated by the whole idea of transformation and, you know, in that continual journey. And I've always believed that the work in inclusion, those concepts, they were designed to help people transform and be the best that they can. When Hamza reached out to me earlier this year and asked if I would be interested in saying a few words at the conference, like in that moment, DEI was in a real predicament, right? And it still is, but in that moment, my first plan was to do the classic conference thing and talk about what happened, what went wrong, what's going wrong, right? What went wrong in the work that I was doing, and why is this program now being kind of diluted under different organizations, budgets being cut back, all that, right? And I wanted to focus on like where it is today. We already know that, and where it's going. But last week, I was on an airplane headed to see my mother, and I started to read some, I guess, was it the Facebook Messenger? Some friend from high school started sending me these random messages. Came out of nowhere, calling me woke and telling me that I was the reason for the problem that exists today with DEI, and just went on and on. And I sat there on the plane reading this. You know, I was kind of bothered, didn't know how to respond, and I haven't. But at that point, I opened my computer, I deleted the presentation I was going to do, and wrote this one last week because I wanted to talk about the good work that DEI brought to the table and talk about it from a business perspective. This work is at a crossroads right now, and it doesn't make sense for me to focus on the negative about something that has clearly helped so many people for so many years. So instead of spending the 30 minutes telling you what you already know is broken, I want to spend this time showing what actually works and worked in my space, both from a human perspective and from a business perspective. And hopefully, it will spark some ideas that you can take back to your organizations and think about how to continue driving this work forward so that it drives system changes and real business outcomes. So before I go on, I want to add a little context and start by telling you a little bit about my path here. I started my career far from the corporate world in the nonprofit sector in Washington, D.C. back in the 1990s. My work focused on a lot of social and small business advocacy. I worked for the nonprofit organizations that were focused on betterment of the Latino community. So, you know, one day I would be in a church basement in Michigan working with community leaders and business leaders to kind of review and understand some of the policy changes that were happening in the country, and, you know, trying to figure out a path forward and capture information on, you know, what their challenges were. And the next day I'd literally be back in Washington, roaming the halls of Congress, meeting with legislators and thinking about how we work on policy initiatives that might impact these businesses and communities. It was great work. It was exciting and very meaningful work for me. And what I learned early on at that time was that if you can't connect your mission to real world impact, you will lose momentum. And so after doing that for several years, I knew I wanted to scale the impact that I was making. And so the opportunity to join CVS presented itself. My first major project in community relations was to launch a $25 million 5-year investment for programs for children with disabilities. The initiative was called CVS Pharmacy All Kids Can. And here I learned about the troubling challenges that individuals with disabilities were going through. And it was, at the time, I remember I was younger, it was gut-wrenching, it was heartbreaking, but, I was with a company that was investing a lot of money to, for these programs. And so we modeled through, we allocated $25 million for 5 years for this program. In additionally, we contributed $75 million annually for social impact programs across the country, all tied to children and healthcare. That work made me realize one thing, that big companies have big levers for big change, but they don't always know how to pull those levers effectively. And I made that my mission during my time at CVS, to figure out how to do that and convince our leadership to drive change within the organization. So from there, I stepped into the inclusion space. We had just hired our first chief diversity officer, who brought with him a model called Strategic Diversity Management. We love our acronyms in business, so I'll call it SDM for short, Strategic Diversity Management. But the model focused on 4 pillars. Workforce representation, and that was to ensure that our workforce reflected our patients, our consumers, our customers, and our communities. The second pillar was colleague engagement. That was about, like, once we put our diversity recruiting strategy together and we started bringing people into the organization, colleague engagement was about, how do we get those people connected? How do we get them connected into the organization, integrated into this very complex corporate environment? The third pillar was talent systems. That was about breaking down the systems inside the organization so that we can create fair systems break down the systems, create equitable systems so that we can have fair opportunities for people in promotions within the company. And then the fourth pillar was marketplace diversity. And that was about how we showed up in the marketplace and in our communities. And you have to understand that communities and marketplace were 2 very distinct things. And so we had very distinct strategies for each of those. And so those were the 4 pillars that was our model when we started our strategic diversity management function. At the time that I joined the SDM team, we had 3 people. I was the 3rd person to come onto the team. We had no infrastructure. We were about to start building a function, and that was very exciting for me. 7 years later, we were ranked the 24th best program, the DEI program in corporate America by Diversity Inc. And now our team had between 65 and 70 people. We had grown exponentially. Our team was made up of strategic diversity management, EEOC and affirmative action, and workforce initiatives. Now, workforce initiatives was not your traditional talent acquisition organization. It didn't sit with TA. It sat with us because of the deep community ties that organization had. And I'll talk a little bit about this in a minute. But how did we get there in 7 years? How did we build a program that was impactful, effective, and well-branded? How did we get the 24th best diversity program, and how did we get 60 to 70 people? We stopped treating inclusion like a nice to have and started treating it like a business function. We had to speak the language of the business and convince the business that this function was going to help drive the goals and the strategies that the company had set forth that year for its shareholders. So the first thing was to align the 4 pillars of our model to the strategy: workforce representation, colleague engagement, talent systems, and marketplace diversity. We had to align those against the backdrop of our corporate strategy and goals, and understand that every division within the organization across the enterprise wasn't going to engage in all 4 pillars. We weren't trying to boil the ocean. We had to introduce and present these concepts in bite-sized pieces so that they were digestible for the leaders in the organizations who had no idea how to do this work. We had to work with the company leadership and division leaders to understand their business goals and determine which of those pillars would support and drive their goals. Here's how we approached this. we focused on three things. Business tie-ins. When we expanded into new markets, we convinced leaders that inclusion needed to be part of that business plan. We looked at our workforce representation. We needed to ensure that our workforce was representative of all markets and communities we were going into. And marketplace diversity, which included supplier diversity, market positioning, and community engagement as levers for economic impact and share of market growth. We needed to make sure that our inclusion models, our inclusion concepts were part of that growth strategy in those markets and communities. So we did the business tie-ins. Second, metrics matters. We measured everything, hiring data, workforce representation, development and promotion rates, talent systems, supplier diversity and spend, market penetration in underserved communities. Like, we measured everything to understand what worked, what didn't, where we had to put training in, where we didn't. The third thing that we had to focus on was executive accountability. Leaders were not just supportive, they had goals tied to performance reviews. That was a huge one for us. Their bonuses and their equity was tied to diversity. And so we designed accountability structures through our ERG network to ensure that leaders were meeting their SDM goals by holding them accountable through the network of ERGs. What I will tell you is something that may sound controversial, and this is the way we function and drove our DEI initiatives all these years. If DEI inclusion is not tied to how business makes money or tied to driving overall organizational goals, it will always be vulnerable to budget cuts. And we were running into that constantly within the organization. So let's take these 4 pillars and let me share with you how they drove results. Workforce representation. Not only did we work with talent acquisition to put together a comprehensive recruiting strategy that was deeply integrated in that talent life cycle, but we also figured out how to make money for the organization through workforce initiatives. Has anybody heard of WOTC? WOTC. One person. For those not familiar, WOTC stands for Work Opportunity Tax Credit. And it's a federal tax credit program designed to encourage employers to hire individuals from certain target groups who face significant barriers to employment. Our workforce initiatives teams then that worked across the country would partner with nonprofit organizations from coast to coast. Organizations such as Mature Workers, programs for individuals with disabilities, veterans programs, second chance programs, right? For those of you not familiar with second chance programs, those are programs that give people that are coming out of prison or jail an opportunity for a second chance in life, right? So training and get them transitioned back into the workforce. So workforce initiatives partnered with those organizations. And what we would do then is identify talent in that partnership, train them, and have them work in our stores until they were ready to either be hired internally or find external opportunities. So what would happen then is we would not only have people working in our stores, but we would get the tax credits up to $20 to $30 million a year in tax credits. We were generating, our SDM team was generating revenue for the company indirectly, but we were doing it through that tax credit, through the partnerships, through the relationships, right? And so that was the creative, innovative approach that we had to take to keep our DEI initiative afloat. Second, colleague engagement. I started the first ERG at CVS when I got there, and I called it LINC, L-I-N-C with L-I-N-C, LINC with a C, and it meant leadership, inclusion, networking, and community. When I left CVS, now when I started, it was me, myself, and I, and then we launched the LGBTQ group and then a Women's Success Network. When I left in 2022, we had 22,000 people or 28,000 people in our ERG program. And we had 15 organizations, and it was being funded at about $300,000 a year with a staff of, I think, 4 or 5. That's how we grew that program. My goal when I started that was to always make sure we could leverage these organizations to drive business results, and we did. We created an internal platform where business units could bring forth a business issue or introduce a new product or service and request one of our many ERGs to serve as focus groups or test groups to identify how the product or services would do in a particular target market. And we would bring these groups in, the leaders would present that, and they would spend time providing feedback and guidance on how this product might show up or better show up in that particular target market. So if it was veterans, we'd bring the veterans in to talk about, how that product or service might show up better within their community. If it was Latino or Black or disabilities or family oriented, we would bring those groups in, and they served as those focus groups. A great example was Valor, our veterans organization. CVS was negotiating with the VA on a huge contract to take veterans overage. So veterans that would go into the VA hospitals who couldn't be seen and didn't have anywhere else to go, the VA was looking for, a system, a healthcare system that might be able to take that overage in. And the VA would pay, that system. Our executives were at the table negotiating with the VA and couldn't quite get the deal put together. They ended up reaching out to us. We brought in Valor, the Veterans ERG, and we ended up bringing members of that team to the table with the VA. And one of the reasons we ended up getting that contract, one of the top 3 reasons, was because they said, hey, the fact that you brought in a manager, a frontline worker who can explain what his experience in getting healthcare delivery was and help all of us understand that better was one of the reasons why we awarded you these contracts. And we got huge contracts because of our ERG teams. We saved millions leveraging our ERG teams, millions, identifying gaps in products and services before even going out to market. Talent systems, that's the 3rd pillar. This was key to our talent life cycle. Happy employees are employees who drive creativity and innovation, right? And if they're not happy, if they don't see a path to success, to a promotion or an opportunity, they're going to leave. And we saw that was the biggest challenge we had. So we needed to ensure we had opportunities for employees to engage, network, and learn. And so we had a robust talent development program that ensured everyone had an opportunity to succeed within the organization. We carefully measured the movement of our diverse talent to make sure it was fair and equitable in their path to their career growth. Let's admit, talent development, which is a key driver for retention, is challenging. If there are no pathways to personal economic opportunity, you will lose the talent. How we did it. We had to deconstruct our offering. We looked at our entire talent development life cycle. The training, we looked at how you get promoted, how you measure everything, and we deconstructed that. And we focused on building an equitable process, right? They talk about, how do you, institutional racism. We rebuilt those processes and those systems to ensure that everyone had a fair opportunity to success. It couldn't just be about tapping people on the shoulder, to develop and promote, but we had to ensure they engaged in an ERG leadership role. They needed to have mentors. They needed to participate in a sponsored development program or an external one, and demonstrate consistent high performance measures. We measured all of it. It wasn't perfect, but it was helping course correct the ship. Diverse marketplace, 4th pillar. As I mentioned earlier, this was about how we showed up in the communities and the marketplace. And so it focused on external partnerships, marketing, advertising, supplier diversity, government affairs, product development. Those were the things that supplier diversity focused on. So here are some things that were really successful, real business drivers under that pillar. After the George Floyd murder, we pooled $600 million for social justice and equity and designed a comprehensive health equity strategy along with all our community partners. We needed to ensure that we were bringing healthcare into underserved communities. And so the $600 million was focused on ensuring that we were pipelining health opportunities within those communities. And when I say pooled, we didn't just magically find money. We had to convince businesses, our business units, to reallocate money in their budgets to reinvest in this effort. So we had to take money that they had committed already for projects to create this $600 million to reinvest into social justice and equity. 2, we increased our supplier spend from $500 million to $2.5 billion. And it wasn't just, about putting a program out there and soliciting for, diverse vendors. We put all hands on deck internally and we scrubbed our vendors and started discovering that we had a lot of vendors that were already certified or were diverse vendors who were not certified. And so we started investing in their certification and in some of their training and learning. And by the time that initial process was done, we were at about $1 billion in spend that we didn't know we were doing. But we increased to $2.5 billion. The third thing is that we opened a chain of Hispanic-focused pharmacies called CVS Pharmacy EMAS. So I'm assuming that there are a lot of CVS pharmacy shoppers here, yes? Right? Did anybody know that CVS had this chain of stores called CVS Pharmacy EMAS that are specifically focused for Hispanic consumers? They did. And, it's interesting because those stores not only had a diverse mix of products, we had Spanish-speaking pharmacists in them. We had culturally competent care and service in those stores, and so it was very intentional in how we built those stores, and we built them in predominantly Latino communities and markets. And then last, we partnered with the National Hispanic Medical Association to create another nonprofit organization called the National Hispanic Pharmacy Association. And we had to kind of go out a little bit and reach out to Walmart, Walgreens, and Pharma, who were our competitors. And I had to get permission from our top executives to do that because what I said was like, we need to pool our dollars together and fund this organization so that we can leverage it to pipeline talent, Spanish-speaking talent into pharmacy schools because we lack Spanish-speaking pharmacists in the marketplace. And so we ended up partnering with Walmart and Pharma, not Walgreens, and we created this organization. And so that's just another example of partnering with organizations, reinvesting, and building programs that help drive talent to, such like, for example, into pharmacy schools. And I tell you all this because, to stay relevant in this space, we needed to go outside the traditional boundaries of DEI, which for most people literally was about recruiting. In our model, it was about how we leveraged our diverse talent to help drive business results. Business was what we were focused on, our goals. So when I look back, again, the 3 things that stand out as critical to that success were integration. DEI was embedded into operations, merchandising, marketing, hiring, supplier diversity. It's got to be integrated across the entire business chain. Second was ownership. Leaders owned it. We stopped saying the SDM team will handle that and started saying the business will handle that with support from the SDM team. We became internal consultants for the business in this space, and we acted that way. And then third, the third thing was proof, metrics. Like, we proved the ROI. If a program improved market penetration, boosted retention, or increased innovation, we showed the numbers. I've spent my entire career trying to prove and demonstrate that this work really drives business, but I had to become very good at analytics. I cannot stress to you how vital data is in this space. It felt like we were always having to make that case using data. Look, CVS is a highly analytical company. We measured everything, like I said. For talent, we had a tool that I created called the Diverse Model. The tool looked at middle management from manager to senior director to ensure we were building talent internally for the next level. Or if we didn't have that talent available, then we would buy the talent. But the tool monitored the talent pool and forced talent acquisition and the HRBPs to work closely together, because if the HRBP worked to promote someone, and we had that gap, then they had to work together and figure out if we could develop somebody and backfill that gap or buy the talent. And so for the first time, we had HRBPs and talent acquisition working together to keep that pool going. There was another tool that I used that was a little controversial, but it looked at internal talent, the length of time in role, and whether or not they had met all the criteria. Criteria that I mentioned earlier, right? Being a part of an ERG, getting a mentor, etc. And in this tool, we would look at, how many years have you been in role? Have you met all the criteria? And are you in the position to get promoted? And what started to show up was that I was seeing that females, in particular diverse females, who had been there, 3-4 years, hadn't gotten a promotion, had met the criteria, were not getting promoted, yet somebody who had been there 2 years, who had done none of the above criteria, were getting promotions. And so that started to show some serious issues and gaps in the system. And so when you start pushing that envelope, people get nervous, right? And so that's the type of data and the type of work that we were doing to demonstrate and show that, hey, this work is very critical to the business. So we measured everything. So here's the obvious, right? DEI is under attack right now. Politically, socially, financially. Companies are scaling back. Others are quietly bearing it under new labels, right? I've seen DEI get diluted under ESG, and then it just disappears. But this work, it's going to survive. It's going to survive because of you, because of conferences and meetings like this, right? To keep this moving forward and finding solutions. But for that to happen, there are 3 things that I believe must happen. It must be business critical. If it doesn't connect to some kind of growth, innovation, or risk management, to name a few, it gets lost. It really does. It must evolve. It must be agile. It can't be the same model in transforming a workforce. The demographics, the politics, and the workforce, it's continually shifting. One of my biggest gripes has been that the model never changed with the changing demographics and the changing workforce. We were stuck with the same model. And the third thing is we must deliver measurable value. This is non-negotiable. We have to stop talking only in terms of morality and start talking in terms of results and impact. And I mean that deeply. We have to get very professional in this work and really start thinking and talking business. That's how this will survive. I'll leave you with this. At my time at CVS, there was a time when our strategy, our SDM strategy, was on the chopping block. Actually, it was multiple times. Budgets were tight, priorities were shifting. The question was, can we really afford this? The answer we gave was simple. This isn't a cost, it's a growth strategy. And we set out to create systems to prove that. Without it, we knew we were leaving markets untapped, innovation stalled, and talent on the sidelines. That reframing served the function, and not only did it survive, but it grew. We grew in 7 years dramatically. So my challenge to you is this. If you believe in this work, don't just fight for its morality. Fight for its place in a business plan. Fight for its place in the goal of your organization. Because when this work is built to last, it changes organizations. I've seen it happen. And when you change organizations, it changes communities. And when you change communities, you change lives. And I believe that we're all here to do that. Thank you.